Father James had spent most of his life anchored to a belief so deeply ingrained it felt unbreakable: money could buy everything. Influence, security, power, even peace of mind. It was a conviction forged over decades of success. Reinforced by contracts signed, doors opened, and problems quietly erased with the stroke of a pen. In the world he had built for himself, glass offices reflecting city lights, heavy doors that closed with authority, smiles carefully measured and strategically deployed, everything had a price. And because he could afford nearly anything, Father James believed he understood life better than most. To him, love was often little more than a transaction disguised as affection. Respect was obedience purchased through comfort. Loyalty was maintained through dependency. Even family, especially family, was something to be managed, shaped, and controlled. James, his only son, had grown up beneath that towering shadow. He was provided for generously, educated meticulously, protected fiercely. From the outside, it looked like privilege. From the inside, it felt like quiet suffocation. Conversations between father and son were short, practical, and weighted with expectations left unspoken. Father James called it responsibility. James experienced it as distance. She did not arrive dramatically. Then Diep appeared. There was no grand introduction, no calculated entrance into Father James's carefully ordered world. She simply existed, soft-spoken, steady, and unmistakably real. Father James noticed her not because of what she wore or owned, but because of what she carried in her eyes, a calm resilience shaped by ordinary struggles. She cooked simple meals. She worked with her hands. She worried about small things, tomorrow's expenses. A child's homework, the weather turning colder, things money rarely had to worry about. At first, Father James dismissed her. He assumed she was like the others, someone who would eventually be impressed. Persuaded, or pushed aside, in his mind, it was only a matter of numbers, a quiet arrangement. A better offer. A clean solution. He had resolved far more complicated problems this way before. Yet something about Diep unsettled him. Watching her from a distance, he noticed how she laughed without restraint. How she listened without interrupting. How she endured without complaint. She did not ask for anything. She did not perform gratitude. She did not bend. That, more than open defiance, made him uneasy. In her presence, Father James felt a strange crack form in his certainty. He began to sense that there were corners of life untouched by wealth. Places where kindness was currency, where patience outweighed power. Diep belonged to that world, a world he had never needed to understand until now. As winter crept closer and tensions quietly thickened, Father James stood at the edge of a realization he was not yet ready to accept. For the first time in his life, he faced someone who could not be bought, controlled, or dismissed. And unknowingly, that was where his carefully constructed empire began to tremble, softly. Silently, but inevitably. If the first encounter was the crack, what followed was the slow, uncomfortable widening of that fracture. Diep began to occupy a space in Father James's thoughts where calculations used to live. She was a question he could not answer with numbers, so he did what he had always done best: he tested limits. He invited Diep into his world, not with warmth, but with quiet authority: a long table, a formal dinner, expensive dishes, polite words sharpened by unspoken judgment. The air was heavy with expectation. Father James watched closely, waiting for hesitation, admiration, or fear. She sat straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Deep surprised him again. She thanked the staff with genuine smiles. She did not stare at the silverware as if it were treasure. Nor did she pretend to belong. She belonged to herself. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but certain, like someone who had learned early that dignity does not come from approval. Subtle at first, Father James offered help, financial support, better housing, opportunities wrapped in generosity. To him, these were reasonable gestures, proof of goodwill. To Deep, they felt like invisible chains. She declined without anger, without embarrassment, just a quiet refusal, firm as a closed door. That refusal echoed louder than any argument. James, watching from the side, felt something shift inside him. For years, he had believed resistance was useless, that standing against his father only led to exhaustion. Yet Deep stood there unarmed, unmoved, and somehow unbroken. It did not accuse or challenge. Her strength was not loud. Father James felt irritation rise, followed by confusion. It simply existed. Why wouldn't she accept what others begged for? Why didn't she understand that security came from wealth? The more he pushed, the clearer it became. Deep valued peace over possession, integrity over comfort. That night, long after the house fell silent, Father James sat alone in his study. The city lights outside his window glowed like coins scattered across the dark. For the first time, they felt cold. He realized that all his life, he had confused control with care. Deep had not confronted him. Provision with love. She had not raised her voice or demanded respect. She had done something far more dangerous. She had shown him a version of strength untouched by money. And in that quiet revelation, Father James began to understand that some hearts are not meant to be bought, but met. The conflict did not arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, like winter rain seeping into walls and weakening foundations from within. Unsettled by Deep's refusal to bend, Father James tightened his grip, not out of cruelty. He told himself, but concern had always been his most convincing excuse. Opportunities were withdrawn. He began with James. Support became conditional. Conversations turned colder, sharper, filled with reminders of legacy, reputation, and responsibility. To Father James, this was guidance. To James, it felt like punishment for daring to love freely. James grew quieter. The confidence Deep had awakened in him was tested by old fears, fear of disappointing his father, of becoming nothing without his approval. He carried the weight silently, believing endurance was the price of being a son. At night, when the world finally slowed, he wondered if love alone was strong enough to survive against blood and power. Deep noticed immediately. She saw it in the way James avoided her eyes, in the pauses between his words, in the tired smile he wore like armor. She did not demand explanations. She waited, patient as earth after a storm. When James finally spoke, his voice broke. Not loudly, but honestly, he confessed his fear of losing everything his father had built for him. Then she took his hand. Deep listened. She did not promise solutions. She did not speak of winning or fighting back. She spoke of choice, of walking forward even when the ground was uncertain, of building a life that belonged to them, not inherited expectations. Their courage was not. Her words were simple. Meanwhile, Father James watched from a distance. Increasingly isolated by his own methods, he saw his son pulling away, not in rebellion, but in quiet resolve. For the first time, Father James felt fear. Not fear of losing power, but fear of losing his son. One evening, he overheard laughter drifting from a modest house nearby. Diep's laughter, warm, unguarded. It stirred a memory he had buried long ago, from a time when love had been uncomplicated. Before he learned to trade warmth for control, in that moment, Father James realized the true cost of his authority. Distance, not pride, not money, and distance, once grown, is far more expensive than he had ever imagined. The turning point did not come with a dramatic confession or sudden apology. It arrived quietly, the way dawn slips into night without asking permission. Alone in his immaculate house, surrounded by things money had bought, including silence, Father James felt something unfamiliar. He had believed strength meant control, fear, that love required pressure to survive. Yet the tighter he held on, the further James drifted away. What unsettled him most was not rebellion, but calm distance. He simply lived beyond the reach of fear. James no longer argued. Deep was the difference. Father James began to notice how people spoke of her, not with admiration for status. She helped neighbors without announcement. But with gratitude, she listened without interruption. She stood beside James without demands. In her presence, James was not smaller. He was lighter. One afternoon, Father James saw them together by chance. They were sharing a simple meal, laughing softly, caring for a child nearby. And it struck him harder than any confrontation ever could. It was painfully ordinary. That evening, Father James asked to see James alone. No conditions. No warnings. When James arrived, prepared for another lecture, he was met with something unfamiliar. His father, older, quieter, uncertain. "I thought money could protect you," Father James finally said. Words did not come easily. "I thought if you depended on nothing else, you would never fall." James listened. Deep waited nearby, present, as always. "I forgot," Father James continued, his voice unsteady, "that when you fall, what you need most is someone who stays." For the first time. He looked at Deep not as a threat, but as an answer. The reconciliation was not perfect. Years of pain do not vanish in a single conversation. Control loosened. But something shifted. Judgment softened. Father James stepped back, not defeated, but wiser. James did not earn his father's approval through obedience or success. He earned it through honesty. Deep did not win anything at all. She simply remained true to herself. In the end, Father James learned the lesson he had resisted for so long. Money can build walls. Only love builds bridges, and sometimes, the greatest strength a person can find is the courage to let go.